Welcome to Biblical Hebrew. Shalom. Baruchim Habayit La'ivrit. I am Brennan. This is a introductory video to be able to explain a bit about language itself. Now, maybe you have taken a language class and you didn't ask this question, what is language? So you're like, I don't need to know it then. But let me just start us off on the right foot by just giving us a few tips about what language is and perhaps how we can understand the concept of language better, which would help us to learn languages a bit better, but also be better translators. That's really the point of today, to frame what we're doing as an experience. Behind me, this is an image of the Leningrad Codex, the oldest known full book that is bound together like this, that has all of the books of what is now the Hebrew Bible in it. This is the frontispiece, a little beautiful image that they made at the very beginning. And you can see that the words are made into pictures themselves of the Star of David and other geometric patterns. The Star of David being an ancient symbol of Judaism. But you can see that the art is made from the words. That's the idea of learning Hebrews. It's supposed to be a beautiful experience. Perhaps it'll feel more difficult than that at the beginning, but my hope is that you end up being in some way entranced or enchanted by the language and by even the strange shapes that make up its letters and so on. But also, all of that we would connect to a sense that God is moving among and through these little pictures of letters, right? Every letter is a little picture. Isn't that strange? So in any event, let us move on. But let's start here. Now, listen to me sing, and you sing after me. At least try. Now, I don't know if you're in a place where you can actually sing out loud. If you aren't, that's okay. Just sing it in your head. But if you can say it out loud, belt it out there, okay? I'm sure you got perfect pitch. So just listen to me and then follow me. Bereshit bara Elohim. Bereshit bara Elohim. Et hashamayim va'et haaretz. Et hashamayim va'et haaretz. Bereshit bara Elohim. Et hashamayim va'et haaretz. So that little song, you can go back and listen to it a couple times if you didn't get all of the sounds, but I do encourage you to try to say it, because what that is that's the beginning of the Bible. It's the very first words of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1. In Hebrew, that book is known as Bereshit, which is the very first word of that book, which is in the beginning, or when God began. So we'll actually learn this word. It's actually two words smushed together. Bereshit. Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning, created God. That's how Hebrew works. It puts the verb, switches the verb and the subject. So, in the beginning, God created. Bara is to create. Elohim is God. Et hashamayim is the heavens or the skies. And et haaretz means and the earth and the land. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we know that this is creation through speech, through word, as Genesis tells us. It's maybe an important thing for us to think about, that words actually bring worlds into being. And that is something that God has taught us. Language itself is miraculous. It's amazing, in fact. It's something that, if you stop and think about it for a minute, it even seems a bit like magic. I'm thinking of something right now, a thought inside my head, and if I want to get it out there, maybe even into your head, I can just use words to give shape to my inner experiences and then put them out there for other people to engage, and they'll kind of understand, maybe not always all the time, but often they'll understand what it is that I'm thinking and feeling, and they can share that too. Isn't that amazing? It's a technology. It's a technology that is almost unimaginable in its complexity too. How complex this thing is, this language that I was helping my son and daughter to learn how to speak over the last 10 years, and just to hear all the mistakes they make has got me to think about how difficult languages actually are and how amazing it is that we even know how to use this stuff at all. So all to say, language is amazing. And this little song that you've sung is the beginning of the Bible is about how language is amazing. And by the way, this is how Jesus is described, right? The Word, the one who forms into a body and into a way of life and into a gospel, something about the essence of who God actually is, which we wouldn't be able to understand fully otherwise. All to say, language is miraculous. It's amazing. And let me set up something for you. This is a little clip. I'm going to edit it in here. This kind of question of what is language kind of takes us on a little bit of a detour. So let me get to the podcast in just a moment. But let me just start with this question. What actually is language? As linguists would tell us, people who study languages are philosophers of language, a language is a structured system of signs and symbols that are meant to communicate. It's a system, a whole system of symbols. And we'll see that in Hebrew. Sometimes something won't make sense, but then you'll learn a different part of the system, and then it'll kind of start to click. That is to say, what words mean actually requires other words to mean things. They work together in a unit, in a system. And like I said, there's this kind of magic almost. There's this thing that we say, tree, for example. Tree. You ever say a word so many times it loses its meaning, like you don't even know? Tree. What a strange bunch of nothing. Tree that ends up meaning all this stuff for us. It puts an idea into our heads, and it allows us to do things, build stuff, to fix things, to help things grow. Right? This use of this symbolic sound, tree, or those pictures up there. By the way, let me point the right way. See up there, T-R-E-E, that's the word, right? And then there's the picture of the tree above it, right? So like tree, the word refers to the tree, the thing, and so on, which is magic in and of itself. But look at those little lines underneath that picture of a tree. That's a picture of a T, and a picture of an R, and a picture of an E, and a picture of an E. Words are all just kind of pictures of these nonsensical things, those shapes that letters make. God didn't make that. That's us, People made these crazy little shapes that somehow correspond to sounds and somehow end up making words that we can use to relate to each other. All to say, it's not necessarily, it's not easy to put into words what words are. Maybe because you're trying to use words to explain words. The strangeness of language is symbolized for me here by this image. It's by René Magritte, a Belgian painter. He's a surrealist. He paints strange things, but often in very realistic ways. So here's an image of a pipe. But then it says in French underneath it, Magritte's language, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe." This is not a pipe. So the joke, of course, is that, yes, it's a pipe. Oh, no, it's a picture of a pipe, right? So when we learn a language, we're learning this symbolic system that isn't exactly the world that's behind the language, right? It gives us access to some of the world back there in ancient Israel and their experiences back there, but the words are actually something kind of different that shapes that world, interacts with it, but also like we have to learn. It's almost like a pair of glasses about how to see the world. And in order to help us explore this just a little bit more, here's the podcast, and I think this is an amazing story. A story of a woman named Susan Schaller and a man who is anonymous but goes by the name Ildefonso, that Susan and he worked out together. But this is a story about a woman who was one of the first sign language teachers in the United States. She herself lost her use of hearing when she was young. I think she was maybe a young teenager, and was, I think, hit by a car and lost her hearing for some time. Regained it, but in the meantime learned American Sign Language. And she was became a teacher of sign language. And one of the first schools that was organized really to help people learn sign language. And she met this man in one of her classrooms, Ildefonso. He was, as she said, tall, very handsome, very dignified, but also seems to not understand what was happening when people were using sign language and when people were speaking to him. That is, lip reading and so on. So he seemed to have a hard time understanding that what people were saying, they were signs or symbols. For example, when Susan would sign her own name, Susan, he would sign Susan back to her. He would replicate the same movements, but he didn't understand that he had a name or that other things had names exactly. He didn't quite understand what Susan was, what it meant that he was responding and replying that way. But all to say, Susan ended up one day, imagine trying to teach someone who didn't understand what language was, right? That's quite a different way of thinking about teaching and of learning. So Susan ends up one day coming up with this idea. And so Susan's going to start by explaining that idea, but then also all that she learned, all that Ildefonso taught her about the nature of language itself.
But after a couple of weeks of him
constantly miming, copying me,
she had an idea.
Perhaps it's just possible that if I died tomorrow, I would have had only one really, really good thought in my life. And this was it. I thought, I'm going to ignore him. I taught an invisible student. I stopped talking to him, and I stopped having eye contact, and I set up an empty chair.
And then she says she would hold up to this empty chair a picture of a cat.
And I was trying to explain to this invisible student that this creature, a cat, so I'd be miming a cat and petting a cat, and then I signed the sign for cat.
Then she would hop to the other seat, the invisible student's seat, and pretend to get it.
Oh, I know, with my facial expression. Oh, I get it.
So you're playing all the parts. You're both the teacher and the invisible student.
That's right.
Wow.
Doing all these crazy things, and he just watched me.
He stopped copying her, which was good.
But I do this over and over and over for days and days and days.
And she says he just didn't get it.
He looked bored a lot of times.
But one day, in the middle of one of these endless pretend student exercises,
something happened.
Out of the corner of her eye, she sees him shift his body.
And he looked, it's interesting how his body was upright, and he looked like something was about to happen. He looked around the room. This is a 27-year-old man, and he looks around the room as if he had just landed from Mars, and it was the first time he ever saw anything. Something was about to happen.
His eyes grew wider, she says, and then wider. And then
he slaps his hands on the table. Oh, everything has a name. And he looks at me in this demanding way, and I sign table. And he points to the door, and I sign door. And he points to the clock, and he points to me, and I sign Susan. And then he started crying. He just collapsed, and he started crying. What is it that happens in human beings when we get symbols and we start trading symbols? It changes our thinking, it changes our ideas of it's no longer the thing, a table that we eat on, but there's something about the symbol table that makes the table look different. Ildefonso was in love. He was in love. It's like everything has a name. And for the first couple of weeks, he had this list of names that kept growing and growing.
Paper, eagle, clock, green.
I kept copying words for him.
Cat, alligator, hat, cardinal.
Gave him the sign for door.
Door.
Then I would
Door.
write D-O-O-R.
Serpent, see that.
And he
strawberries.
folded this paper
Paper.
as if it was treasure. And he would pull it out every day, and he would
Lion.
carefully unfold it.
Tiger.
And he would add to it.
Orange juice. Apple. Blue jay. Thinking. Leaf. Horse. Leaf. Idea.
Add to it.
Lamb. Blue. Table. Bird. Wall. Dove. Name.
Add to it.
Pig. Left. Front. Right. Cows. Hawk. Left. Of the blue wall. Octopus. Symbol. Treasure. Bird. Eggs. Orange. Hippopotamus.
What is it that happens in human beings when we get symbols?
Symbols.
And once you have begun to put words onto things, you can look at a thing, say this symbolic sound, table, and the person opposite you knows that you're talking about.
But she seems to be saying something deeper, though, that like when you get the word for table, that suddenly the table, like this table right here, looks different. Like it somehow the word changes the world in some fundamental way.
So everything has a name. And the idea that things in the world are not their symbols. Symbols aren't the things themselves. When I say the word chair, I don't make a chair appear. But at the same time, the word chair and the idea, the concept of chair, shape the way that I see pieces of wood that are constructed in that shape, that recognizable shape of a chair, even if they're not. That is to say, my language shapes the way that I walk through and see and understand the world. And the idea of symbols representing things that might give us some insight into what we're actually doing when we're learning a language. We are learning a symbolic world that is a lot more than just, and is very different from what we just think about when we think about our own experience of the world. So it changes the world in some fundamental way, language itself. And we're going to learn a new way of seeing the world. It's going to be hard. It's going to be strange and difficult and unusual. It's going to require you to stretch yourself at times, to stretch your imagination even at times. But count that as a blessing every time you have to stretch your imagination in this class, because it means that you are encountering a different way of seeing the world. A way that is the way of seeing the world for the people to whom God spoke thousands of years ago, which amazingly, miraculously, we can enter into. And we can enter into it much more, I think, faithfully and generatively if we know this language. So, here we go. One last little bit of encouragement. One of my favorite authors here, his name is Frederick Buechner. I don't know if you all have ever heard of him. I'm going to put myself next to Frederick Buechner there just because I like him so much. Hi there, Fred. Hi there, Fred. So Frederick Buechner is a Presbyterian minister and an author. He has written some beautiful, beautiful books and beautiful sermons and so on. And this is a little quote that I'll read to you from a book that he wrote called The Alphabet of Grace. This is on pages 8 and 10 to 11, edited together a bit. Like the wind blowing over a lake, the invisible manifests itself in the visible. Words, too. The invisible manifests itself in the visible. I think of the alphabet of letters, literally. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all 26 of them. I think of how poetry, history, the wisdom of sages, and the holiness of saints, all that invisible stuff comes down to us, dressed out in visible alphabetic drab. H and I and J, K, L, M, N are the mold that our innermost thoughts must be pressed into finally if we are to share them. O, P, Q, R, S, T, U is the wooden tongue that we must speak if we are ever to make ourselves known. That must be spoken to us if we are ever to know. V, W, X, Y, Z. I am thinking of incarnation, breath becoming speech through teeth and tongue, spirit becoming word, silence becoming prayer, the holy dream becoming the holy face. I am speaking of the humdrum events of our lives as an alphabet. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and God said, "Let there be light." Darkness laps at my sleeping face like a tide, and God says, "Let there be Buechner." Why not? Out of the primeval chaos of sleep, God calls me to be alive again. Waking into that new day, we are all of us, that first human, on that first morning of creation, and the world is ours to name. All the days of your life have brought you to this day, and you must live it as though it is the last day yourself. Because be assured that it is. You will never see this day once it is past, and never again will you be this self again. I feel like I should say amen at the end of that. I love that passage in part because it's getting us to think about how our experiences, and if we are to share our experiences, and even when we think about them, when we process them by writing them down in a diary, when we speak about them to people, when we preach about them or teach about them, when you make an autobiography, anything that you're going to do of yourself that you're going to try to express or think in any way, it's going to have to use language. And it uses the shape of these letters that we are about to learn. So the most basic language of level of language is composed of letters. Letters combine to create words. And then there's, of course, rules that help speakers to craft these words into meaningful sentences. And we'll have to learn all of those things in turn, including vowels, air letters, A, E, I, O, U, which are a bit different in Hebrew than they are in many languages. So we got to begin today with the letters, and then tomorrow we move on to words, and the rest of the semester we'll work on putting words together and learning words. If I can leave you with a thought at the end of this video, let me say this. As Christians, we believe that God self-revealed to a bunch of strange, forgotten folk at the backwater of an empire thousands of years ago. This The Hebrew Bible is the record of the oldest part of that interaction. And if you work hard, you will have the privilege of seeing their encounter with God through their own eyes as they expressed it. And let me tell you, the world looks pretty different when you put on these glasses. This is an immense privilege. Taking Hebrew might seem like a overwhelming obstacle put in your way that other people put there for you and that you don't want to try to surmount yourself. But instead, let me encourage you to see it as a privilege. Christians throughout the history of Christianity would have given so much to learn Hebrew. Augustine himself didn't know Hebrew. One of the greatest and most famous thinkers in the whole history of the church didn't know Hebrew at all. And you, at the end of today, are going to know more than he ever did. What a privilege that is. How many people around the world would love today to have the experience and the knowledge of knowing Hebrew, to be able to translate and help their communities? And I don't know, but if you ask me, I feel like Christianity is in a pretty important spot right now, where there's a lot of work that needs to be done on how to read the Bible and how to teach people about how to read the Bible and what the Bible actually says. And we are desperately in need of people with these skills that are willing and happy to work for the church, for the good of the world. So don't take this lightly. Jesus once said, to whom much is given, much will be required. You're learning a special skill that the church and the world need desperately. So take it seriously, please. I'll see you in the next video when we talk about the history of the Hebrew